Welcome back. As we have seen, rising food prices have sparked unrest in many countries. It's also prompted other countries to apportion the blame over who they think is responsible. But what can be done to combat the underlying issues? Issues like food speculation, kind of like trading in foreign currencies but using food instead. With vast amounts of money flooding the world's commodity markets, hedge funds and small investors are making their presence felt. They're betting on agricultural markets from Peru to Vietnam, and to put it quite simply, they are making a killing. You've got rising demand for biofuels and restrictive trade barriers in Europe and the US. They're not helping either. And then there's the issue of waste in the developed world. In the UK alone, some 6.7 million tonnes of food is thrown away at a cost of $20 billion each and every year. That creates false demand and helps keep prices artificially high. Still with us, our guests in New York, Marion Nestle, in Bonn, Vandana Shiva, and in Cairo, Heba Kandil. Ladies, thanks for staying with us. I'm going to go to New York now and speak to Marion Nestle. I brought up a few issues there. Let's start with that last one I mentioned, the issue of waste. I mean, it's really quite abhorrent, really, that there is so much food wasted when, as we always say, there are so many people going hungry and there is apparently a food shortage in the world. How do you think that issue of waste can be addressed, this habit of waste?
Well, I think it's going to be addressed as food prices go up. People will buy more food and will use it more efficiently. So that's going to happen. But the real problem here is to try to develop some kind of sustainable agriculture system that works for people over the long term. I think what the World Food Program is doing is solving the crisis in an immediate way, but in the long term, people have to be able to grow their own food and do it in a sustainable way, and that's really where the efforts need to be focused right now, starting immediately.
You sounded quite optimistic there about this idea of waste being addressed. Maybe I'm just a typical pessimistic journalist, but my thought was that it's not something that would be changed in a hurry. Therefore, if there is that amount of waste, what do you think could actually be done with it? Can it be used in some proper way?
Well, it is being used. It's being used to compost. It's being used to feed animals. It's being used for all kinds of purposes now. It could be collected more efficiently and done and dealt with more efficiently, but I don't think that's really where the problem is. The problem lies on the other end, which is the supply side, and that's the problem that really needs fixing. As prices go up, people will be more careful about what they buy. We're already seeing that in the United States as the cost of food has gone up by almost twofold just in the last 2 or 3 months. And this is hurting people here just as it's hurting people in other countries, although not to the same level of desperation.
Heba Kandil, in Cairo, are you as optimistic as Marion Nestle is there, that people will be more careful with their money and that there will be less wastage as we go on?
Well, I think the world has realized just how critical this food insecurity or the food price rises have been. The approach is really multilateral. We're calling governments, NGOs, and think tanks to the table to work towards an approach. Like my colleague Marion was saying, investment in agriculture is an important factor that everyone has to look into, making farming more productive and secure in developing countries. But of course, immediately we do have to realize we have to help vulnerable people in the immediate sense as well, immediate sense and in the long term. But we have every reason to be optimistic. We've got a lot of donor contributions that have responded to our appeal. We've managed to fund around 62% of that $756 million funding shortfall. So really, it is call for optimism, like you say.
Okay, I want to stay on this issue of waste for a moment. Go back to Vandana Shiva in Bonn. My thought from here, sitting in a studio here, is that in the developing world, that waste is much less of a problem, that what they have is used much more efficiently. What and how could the developed world learn from that?
Well, the first thing is, when you have local biodiversity as your food base, knowledge about how to use every part of a plant, and if you are meat eaters, every species of fish, every part of an animal, you have no waste. I go to Bengal, I go to Kerala in India, every part of the banana is used, from the flower to the stem to the fruit. In mustard, we use the leaves, we use the seed for oil. That, I think, is a knowledge that we can transfer to the north. There is definitely a waste problem in the north, and that comes from the fact that, for example, as factory farming has grown, and with the subsidies available for this very costly and wasteful way of production, where you put in more feed than you get out as food, this negative energy system is subsidized and made viable, and then it's made artificially cheap. So the Europeans start to eat just chicken breast, very cheap, and yet the chicken has legs, it has wings. All of that is sent to the south. But the small poultry farmer, which used the poultry to control pests in their field and used every part of the chicken, if they're meat eaters, suddenly aren't able to sell their chicken in the local market because of this dumping. So the waste of Europe, in fact, is killing people in the south by robbing people of livelihoods in agriculture and livestock production.
So then how would you transfer that knowledge? You talk about that knowledge which is there. How would you personally put this into action and transfer it to the north, as you say?
Well, I do that all the time. I run a small school called the School of the Seed on our ecological farm. We run courses, we run classes to be able to tell people both in India and the world that monocultures and single function of plants and animals is a highly wasteful way to use the energy that these plants and animals have absorbed in their lifetimes. We need diversity, and we need multifunctional, multi-purpose use of everything, and we need to be able to conserve every element of food. The wastage that is so prevalent now in Europe and North America comes out of the fact that the factory farming system, industrial agriculture system, with its huge subsidies of $400 billion a day every year, more than $1 billion a day, $400 billion a year, and $1 billion a day, is leading to very costly food being available cheap. The prices of food are now rising, of course, but the high-cost production system isn't changing, the subsidies aren't changing, and when the World Food Programme talks of more investments and more production, my worry is that these subsidies will now be used to help Monsanto introduce genetically engineered Bt cottonseed and herbicide-resistant seeds, which will reduce food production in the third world, and that in the name of increasing productivity, which is pseudo-productivity, more chemical agriculture will be spread.
Okay,
I think the message coming out of Bonn right now about biodiversity being the way to generate food security has to be taken seriously.
Okay, I'm going to jump in there because I want to raise another point before we do run out of time. Another issue, stockpiling. Let's go back to New York. Marion Nestle is there for us. This idea of countries stockpiling food because of this global food crisis for their own use, obviously. What do you make of that practice and the long-term effect of that?
Well, obviously it's not a practice that's there to help people. It's there to help industry and to help, you know, it's part of the capitalist system. And right now we're in an era in which capitalism is running rampant and is being allowed to. I think we need some controls on it in order to meet the needs of people throughout the world. And if this food crisis has shown one thing, it's that it's time to take a look at the global system of food production and try to put some regulations on it so it'll be a little bit more equitable. It doesn't have to be completely equitable, but it has to be a little bit more equitable.
Marion Nestle talks about controls on the system. Heba Kadil in Cairo. What controls do you think, from the World Food Programme's perspective, could be put in to address the stockpiling issue?
Well, again, WFP is not in a position to comment on one measure or the other. I think it's best to leave it to analysts to come up with that. Really, our concern is to just provide safety nets and to help with the food security in many countries. That is the approach that we're taking, and we're working together with several partners to that end.
But just really quickly, it's probably a practice which doesn't really help your cause, though. It would be fair to say that, wouldn't it?
Well, again, it has to be preceded by a lot of analysis. I mean, if we're talking about, for example, we recognize that some protectionist measures that have been adopted by governments in response to this food crisis, such as export bans, we recognize that it's just it's a type of measure that governments are basically taking in response to this crisis. But we recognize the fact that it has to be preceded by analysis, otherwise it can be counterproductive. we're really working with a lot of information, and it's just it's too soon to tell what's going to happen.
So many issues discussed, so many things, but ladies, I do thank you for your time. Marion Nessel there in New York, Vandana Shiva in Bonn, and Heba Kandil in Cairo. We're all out of time here at Inside Story. Thanks for joining us. From the whole team, goodbye for now.